next module is executing the hacking methodology. Because as we said, we want to execute the same hacking methodology as a malicious hacker. And that's what we're going to do in this module. And the objectives are review zero-day challenges and the benefit, and we're going to formulate our hacking methodology. That is, we're going to start looking at a step-by-step process and methodology to break in from a red team concept. So the first thing we do is we create a security testing plan. Even a red team will create a plan. Why? Plan, and when you think you're done planning, go back and plan some more. Because the more you plan and you create a strategy for your attack, the more successful it'll be. Critical elements are define the goal in writing. What is the goal? Is the goal to break in and steal a password file? What's the scope of work? Can I test anybody within the organization, or are there certain areas off limits? Red teams will have limits because if we're breaking things, they're probably not going to allow you to break their database because their database probably has significant data and important information, and they don't want that to be actually corrupted. Mark off limits areas. What's off limits? And rules of engagement. Can I go on site? Can I meet your people and talk to them and try to trick them or deceive them into giving me information? Can we define the deliverable? What's the deliverable? Maybe I steal a file? Maybe I steal a laptop? What is the deliverable for the client to know that we met the scope of the security testing plan? We have an example here for you called the Open Source System Testing Methodology Manual, otherwise known as the OSTEM. This is an excellent reference for creating a security testing plan. And you might want to look at it to look more into how do I go about doing professional security testing. So what is a security testing plan? Define the goals and get authorization in writing. As we said, the CIO or above is recommended. It's never an informal project. What are we going to achieve? What's going to be achieved? What are we trying to achieve with the test? Performing a security test must have authorization, as we said. Scope of work that frames the times. What time can I do the testing? As a red team member, normally you're going to live the life of a vampire. That is, you're going to start at midnight and you're going to finish about 7 or 8 a.m. Or the last test I did, you actually had to finish at 4 a.m. I got to start at 10 p.m., but I only could go to 4 a.m. because they had an early shift that come in. So that means you don't get much sleep. You'd work in the middle of the night. Like I said, you become a vampire. Okay? What networks do I in transit? This is the part a lot of people don't understand. If as a red team member, I fire up at a hotel and I start attacking, do I have permission from that ISP, that internet service provider? Do I have permission to do that attack? This is something you have to consider, because in most cases there's what we call a user agreement or end user license agreement, a EULA or a user agreement 1, that your ISP, when you go and you connect at that hotel or wherever you're connecting at, has this really big document that you have to use to select a button that says you accept the agreement or click a button that says yes, you accept. Do you ever read it? Inside that will tell you specifically what you can and cannot do. Remember, as an ethical hacker, you have to have authorization. So if that hotel has in there that you don't have authorization to do what you're doing, you could be in violation. So a lot of times with clients, you try to find either a close hop to the client, so you don't have to transit very many networks, or you ask the client to give you a point-to-point access into the perimeter edge. And then once you have the perimeter edge, it's the same as an external hacker would have, but you're not breaking or violating any user agreement of an internet service provider. So be careful when you do your testing. Are you transiting networks that you don't have authorization to transit? Mark off limit areas, what's not allowed to be tested. In most cases, organizations aren't going to allow you to test anywhere that's got sensitive information. Doing stock markets, I do a lot of stock markets, banks, things like that. You never get to test the financial databases. They're not going to let you test the financial database. If that's billions and billions of dollars in revenue for them, or Qatar Rial in Qatar, or all these other countries, Euro, those types of things, they're not going to let you do that testing. They're only going to give you samples or simulate that environment. And that's the reality of testing. Rules of engagement. Is denial of service allowed? In a red team hack, we never really want to do a denial of service. It's rarely really involved, because if we do a denial of service, guess what we just did? A denial of service. That means we no longer have our target to play with. That's not our goal. Our goal is to have the target online so we can test it. And then finally, social engineering. It's very common today for people to try to get social engineering attacks against you and those types of things. So it's a good thing to ask your client for. But in red team hacking, they rarely give you social engineering because remember, it's unannounced. Nobody wants the IT staff or anybody else running the network operations center or wherever to know that somebody's been hired to do an actual attack, a red team attack. So because of that, it's rare in a red team that you're allowed to go on site and do social engineering. Define the deliverable. What's it involve? One host, one vulnerability, a site penetration test. Results must be recorded and reported. This is normal security testing plans. Testing outlines. We already told you about the OSTEM, the Open Source System Technology Methodology Manual. We also have from NIST, National Institute of Standards, we have a special publication, 800-115, which is actually the guide to assessments for security testing. So you might want to check both of those guides out. Okay, the SP 800-115 is a technical guide to information security testing and assessment by NIST. It gives you security testing overview, review techniques, target identification analysis, target vulnerability validation techniques. Validation techniques, again, remember means exploitation. This means we're trying to exploit the target and validate our vulnerabilities, which is part of red teaming. Security assessment and post-test activities. That is, if you get exploitation, you get on the machine, what do you do from there? Sometimes you do what's called post-exploitation, which you'll crack passwords, you'll do other things and stuff like that. The hacking methodology. What is the hacking methodology? Planning is the number one step. A logical and tested strategy is essential to reach and compromise victims. Research and record keeping are vital. What works and what does not work? The deliverable report. Our steps to a successful hack are surveillance, footprinting, enumeration, identify vulnerabilities, exploitation, cover your tracks, and evasion. Surveillance. We want to gather the non- or semi-technical background information to be used later to refine attacks. Publish and open information. It's usually in the public. It's in the domain. Internet, once something's on the internet, it never goes away. Discover information about users, applications used, and their sites. A lot of times a job listing. In their job listing they'll say, oh, must be Red Hat Linux certified. Well, guess they're running Red Hat Linux. Cisco, must be Cisco certified. CCNA, CCNP, those types of things. Guess what? They're running Cisco, right? These are the types of things we use. Some other resources for us. The Wayback Machine. Wayback Machines are great. Archive.org will show in an actual demonstration. You could see the Wayback Machine. But the Wayback Machine is great because nothing ever leaves the internet. Once it's been on the internet, somebody's copied it somewhere. Well, the Wayback Machine has about 150 billion pages of internet content. So even though a website might go away, one of your favorite websites, using the Wayback Machine, we can retrieve it. And sometimes you can retrieve the files and other information from the site too. It's great for doing our surveillance because we can find information about the company that maybe eventually somebody figured out was leakage or information that shouldn't be there, but we still can discover it in what's called open source intelligence gathering. We got Whois. We can just do a Whois on the actual domain and find out who's in charge of the domain and the IP block and those types of stuff. As we said, the victim's own published information. And then search engines. Google hacking, the search engines, those types of things. These are the power today because the internet is a full repository of information and people spider it or index it for searches. And the most common one is Google hacking, leveraging the search engine made famous by a hacker named Johnny Long. And it's great, a lot of cool stuff. It's Hackers for Charity. They do a lot of good things. And they have what's called Google Dorks. And Google Dorks is an expression that someone has used to show someone how to attract or extract information of the internet. So if you look here at the example, it says pages containing login portals. There's 232 entries. So if you click on that Google Dork, it'll come up and give you an actual search query that you can put in not only Google, but Bing and some of the other search engines. This is made into science now because of all the public information out there, social networking, anybody. And what we can do is we can pull that information from the internet and display it and look at the information. So what can we pull? Well, advanced operators. We can look at the site, restrict the search to a specific website or domain, a link or a file type, search only the type of a file, a link, search within hyperlinks for a search term, A cache, a version of the web page that's cached by Google, which is quite common. End title, search for a term within the title of a document, which is another common way of looking for different types of things. So some basics. NUR, search only within URL of a document. For an example here, we'll show an example of Ford.com. And all we're searching for is the word Ford with all the pages of Ford.com. And when you see the actual query results here, we have 11,800 pages that have Ford in the query at Ford.com. So now this gives us information that we can use to extract data. Remember, this is the surveillance stage. In the surveillance stage, we're trying to extract data and get information. Brings us to our next lab, surveillance.